actually the noses of my staff when they were out there taking samples. And they did smell the odors that everyone here has smelled. It is real. It's possible we will not pick those up in the way that we sampled, though, for two reasons. One is those odors may be caused by things we either can't measure or are not considered, quote, air toxics by EPA, so we did not quantify those. And the other reason is if they are short-term, we may not pick those up in those longer-term samples. So, again, I think the study was important. It showed it points us in certain directions for possible future studies. It showed there were certain things that may not be of major concern. There are other things that we have to look into more. Again, ultrafine particles is a very new field. There have been a lot of studies showing there are increased health risks from them, but it is an unregulated pollutant, and the measurement of that pollutant is still something that exposure people have not agreed is the best way to measure it, but there is something with that as well. I want to put in one other plug here. Again, that draft report, hopefully within the next month, will come out. The other plug I have is that on February 13th at AQMD, we're holding a aircraft technology forum. We hold these forums as part of our technology advancement office almost on a monthly basis. And there's going to be a panel of experts, including myself, on monitoring, on health effects from airports, also airline industry representatives, airport representatives, talking about what's coming out of jet aircraft and other aircraft, and what the impacts on the community would be, and what are some of the mitigation strategies that could be used to minimize these emissions from airports and aircraft. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Fine. Yeah, there's a couple of us who are going to go to that at least. I'm looking forward to it. I have some questions that I would like to pose to you, but I don't know, is there anybody that maybe wanted to make a comment now about anything, or can I start to ask these questions?
I had a thought to ask Philip, if I may.
Absolutely.
If the results from the monitoring you did, and again, very robust, there's no question about it, and clearly I think he's going to ask you about limitations in that regard. Kind of a general question. If you suggest that the results were not, other than a few compounds, but not exceeding any ambient air quality standard, and certainly we know ultrafines, there is no standard, and there's not going to be a standard for light years, okay, until a lot of research is done in that regard, but certainly a marker for us seeing extent of emissions from the source. It seems to suggest that the long-term work that you did and the monitoring work that you did shows that this airport has very little effect on the local community. It would seem to suggest. And I think VNY, Van Nuys was the same. I think we had similar results. And I think similar results regarding LAX, I mean, as far as these exposures. If that seems to be the case, what is AQMD doing in a discussion about health risks and how you can mitigate risks if their data seems to suggest that there is no impact or are no risks associated with this type of source?
I don't know that the results could lead us to conclude that there were no impacts from the airport or from the aircraft emissions. I think what it tells us is, given all the other sources of pollutants, mainly vehicles, passenger vehicles, heavy-duty trucks, those sources constitute a very large portion of the emissions, and so it's difficult to parse out what comes particularly from the aircraft. So I think, so it's hard to quantify it. If we do your type of study, do the computer modeling, you can come up with some sort of quantitative estimate of what those exposures and any sort of risks might be. So that's one. Our instruments generally aren't sensitive enough to pick up those impacts. Second, as Phil said, the levels that were measured weren't, I guess, all that different than what we'd expect to find from other areas of Southern California. And in fact, Santa Monica is generally on the lower side of toxic air pollutants. Higher levels are usually found around sources like the ports or where there's a lot of freeway traffic, such as downtown Los Angeles and south of Los Angeles near the rail yards. But there were a couple of things we measured that were more unique to aircraft emissions. And as Phil said, one was lead. Saw an impact there, so that was measurable. And particle counts, or ultrafine particles. And when the jet takes off, of course, there's a big pulse of particles that are emitted, and that does track into the community, so you can measure those. So you've got three things that measure that, yeah, there are impacts of the emissions. You've got the lead, you've got the particle counts, and then, of course, as staff reported, you can smell the stuff. You know, when you burn the kerosene-like fuel, there's quite an odor that's unpleasant. So I don't think we can say there was no impact. There might be some difficulty in trying to quantify that exposure relative to other sources for some of the toxics, but I think the impact is definitely there.
Fine. Did you want, I wanted to just sort of, and we still want to get on to the public comment, but the AQMD airport study had been touted by officials from Santa Monica and others as a study that will answer the questions the community needed to have answered, such as what health risks are associated with aircraft operations and how can we best control the pervasive smell of jet kerosene. Do you feel they're correct in their characterization of the airport study? And from the sounds of it, sounds like that's not the case. But can you speak briefly about that? And what do you feel have been the strongest accomplishments of the airport study?
Want me to do that one? Again, the study did not directly address health impacts. It was not a control study. It didn't address how to control the odors. I think we all know how to remove the odors of burning jet fuel. You stop burning the jet fuel, or is a simple way to do it. So I think the strongest accomplishments of the study is that the data did show that there were gradients of some pollutants related to aircraft operations.
Mark, let me just, I just sort of like to get these flowed in. I sort of think they might fit in. I'd like to ask both you and Dr. Fine, what were the strengths and weaknesses of a monitoring study? And if you were going to do a follow-up study to quantify both short-term and chronic health risk from the emissions, how would you recommend doing so?
Well, I think one of the strengths is that there hadn't been studies like this done before focusing on general aviation airports. This is one of the first of its kind. Since it was conducted, there's been a couple of other studies done on the East Coast, and actually with some similar results that I have seen. And unfortunately, a lot of those results, like some of ours, were inconclusive, and like Dr. Hospital said, that's one of our challenges. If the airport is increasing exposure by a small percentage, it's hard for our instruments to quantify that small percentage. So the strengths, I would say, is that it was a well-designed study for what it was, and it was one of the first to look at general aviation airports and the communities around the airports. It was definitely, one of the weaknesses, obviously, was it did not address acute effects or odors specifically. And I think one of the things you could do following up is look at more continuous instrumentation that doesn't rely on these long-term averages, so you could really see what those spikes look like. Unfortunately, when it comes to air toxics, there's not a lot of stuff out there that can do continuous air toxics. There are a few experimental instruments. They're not traceable to, say, EPA established methods, but we're looking into those types of things for situations such as this. And again, I think there's other things that could be done as far as